Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between a different series of games to explore their evolution, design, and legacy. I'm your host for this episode, Logan Moore, and today we are going to be talking about the Banjo-Kazooie series once again for our Season 3 that we are in the midst of, and we are talking about nuts and bolts in today's episode. Joining me, as always, is Max Roberts. Hi, Max.
Hello. Are you ready to build a car? Or a boat? Or a plane?
Isn't that the song that they sing in Frozen? Can you build a car?
Can you build a car? No, I don't think that's quite how it goes. I mean, you could probably build a snowman car.
You probably could in this game. They do give you a lot of customization tools to build things. And that's probably the best part about the game.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert for how we feel about this game. So this episode, we will be joined by a guest later on, and we will get to that in a bit. But per usual here on Chapter Select, we wanted to open up and talk about nuts and bolts. What is this game? When did it release? Who made it? Let's talk about all the staple things about Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. The game, like its predecessors in this larger Banjo-Kazooie series, was made by Rare. The game was published by Microsoft, though. This was the first game. Rare had been purchased, and they had released Grunty's Revenge and I guess technically Banjo Pilot under Microsoft, even though Microsoft did not publish those games. But this was the first game since Rare had been acquired by Microsoft that they published with Microsoft Studios. Therefore, the game only came to the Xbox 360. It launched on November 11th, 2008. The game director, once again, same game director as Kazooie and Tooie, which is pretty interesting when you think about how much this game zagged compared to the others. Game director was Greg Mayles. It was produced by Roger Carpenter at Microsoft Game Studios. The music was done by Grant Kirkhope, once again, the composer of the previous games, alongside Robin Beanland and David Klinik, I believe.
Yeah, that looks correct to me. The three of them actually are all Rare composers, and so they kind of all came together for this game.
Rare has had a lot of composers over the years that have, like David Wise is another big one that I think of, the guy who did the Donkey Kong Country series. They've always had a lot of different talent over there in the music department. Even though Kirkhope and Wise, I feel like, get a lot of the credit for a lot of things they do. They've always had some other people over there working behind the scenes. The game's Metacritic score was a 79 out of 100, which I think is kind of surprising, maybe to a degree, because this is the entry in the series that people bash on pretty frequently. So you would think that maybe before you come to listen to this episode that the game would have Metacritic average maybe in the 60s or so, but nope, it's teetering on an 80 there at 79. So
it's essentially the same score as Mario Kart Double Dash.
Sure. Is that actually the Metacritic average?
I don't know if that's
Mario
the Metacritic average. I do
average?
know that IGN's review was a 7.9 though.
Yeah, I feel like Mario Kart Double Dash would have been higher overall, but I know that was always the joke about IGN's score. So yeah, this game was not really hated widely by critics when it came out. Over the years, though, that tune has sort of changed, I think, amongst general audiences and a lot of fans who have played this game over the years. So yeah, there's a lot to dive into with Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts here, and so let's dive into it with our guest for the episode, our friend Michael Ruiz. Hello, Michael.
Hello, howdy. How are you guys?
Okay, I guess. I mean, we're talking about Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, so it can only do so well, I guess.
I guess.
I'm flying sky high because you're here with us, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
So, I guess to explain why you're here, to some degree, let's talk about our experiences with this game. And Michael, the reason you're here is because you have always loudly told us that Nuts and Bolts is your favorite Banjo game.
Was I memeing? Yeah.
Do you regret now saying that? Probably.
No, I don't regret it, but I guess we could get into that.
What is your actual history with the game then?
It was a game that I rented at a Blockbuster when it came out, it is the one that I always remember as far as that. Like, as like one of the ones that it's one of the games I remember playing from a Blockbuster. It's like that's the nostalgia factor for me, having those memories attached to that kind of thing. Especially during that time, because the Xbox 360 was like, well, there's the GameCube, I guess, but the 360 was like my game system. The GameCube I was still sharing with people, but the 360 was my system. I also connected with, this was the first game I remember.
Because
yes.
Xbox Connect.
This was also the first game, I think, it was like the same, it came out around the same time where you were able to download games on your Xbox 360 from the disc, so then it was faster to load video games.
Like you could install
I think I remember
from
that.
the disc instead of reading it off the disc.
It was like a new update they put, because this came out.
But it still wasn't that fast, like for the time.
No, it wasn't that fast. No, and I thought like, oh, maybe I could just download games into my Xbox 360 and never pay for a game ever again. And it doesn't work that way. Turns out,
it still doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
It reminds me, the PSP did that too, like with Birth by Sleep or Peace Walker. You could install chunks of the game to help it load faster.
Well, I mean, that's how Xbox One or Xbox Series X and PS5s are. When you download a game,
there's no reading
off the disc, and but I mean, like, you're still downloading. Like, I don't know, it's that same kind of install procedure. So, yeah, it's just a game that I liked. Banjo-Kazooie, the first one. I played only a little bit of the second one, but the first one's like one of my favorite platformers of all time. So I went to this one like, oh, this will be fun and stuff, and I like it, but it's definitely very different. So,
2008, you remember it a little differently.
Yes, definitely.
Max, what's your story with this? Because if I'm not mistaken, you were kind of more blind to this one, right? Like
I really have no history or experience with this game. It's more been just kind of through the social talk about it, just people memeing on it and joking about it. I really was never. I didn't have a 360. My first Xbox I got when Halo 5 came out, so kind of right after Halo 5 came out is when I got an Xbox. And I never played this, never really saw gameplay. I do remember the reveal trailer. I rewatched that today and knew that I had seen that before because it's all this like pencil animation with the 3D model of Banjo and Kazooie. It has none of the construction element in it. I suppose you could allude to it through the pencil drawing kind of blueprint style, but yeah, really I have there's probably an E3 demo that I saw at one point, but I've washed that away from my brain.
Yeah, my memory with this was, it's weird because I can pinpoint the exact second I realized that this game existed, and it was via a Game Informer magazine, I believe, because back then that was still kind of a like things like, I don't know, I was watching X Play at that time, and I'd watch E3 each year, but I wasn't following game news like moment by moment, second by second, kind of like we can do nowadays, like in the age of Twitter and social media and things like that, where you can keep up with those things a little bit more easily. So yeah, literally the first time I found out that this game existed and it was coming out was in a magazine. And I remember freaking out and being so excited that they were making another Banjo-Kazooie game because I had obviously loved the original one as a kid. And so to know that this was coming back, I was just thrilled about. I didn't really know anything too much about it. I mean, again, I read the descriptions for it in the magazine and I watched a couple things for it, and I just generally knew when it was coming out. And then I asked for it for Christmas one year and I got it for Christmas, and I played it for a couple hours. I think my old save was actually still, actually no, my old save wasn't still active when I played this time around. But just looking at my achievements that I had gotten before, I think I got around 20 or so jiggies in the game. Mm-hmm. So I had played it, but I stopped, and I always said that I would get back to it. And it's funny because like over the years, I've dunked on this game and joked about this game and kind of everything, played along with everything else that people say about it. But at the time when I played it, I didn't cognizantly know that I hated it. I was like, oh, this isn't bad. It's more Banjo. I'll play this at some point. But there's a reason it like fell by the wayside on my backlog, and that's because the game stinks.
Yeah.
It's not fun to play. And I knew that in the time, but I just like was not willing to admit that I had no desire to play
Well,
it.
it's that mental hurdle of like, you didn't, but your parents bought the game and that's the game that you have. And so you decide that you like it because that's the game you can play now. So,
I mean, and it came out in 2008. So I would have been 14 years old. So I didn't have a job or any sort of steady income. So yeah, It was like one of those things where it's like, oh, this is the game I got. I want to play this at some point. I probably will, and never did. Especially because like, it was one of those things where I was such a huge fan of Banjo, even though I had never played 2E or anything like that. Literally, I was just a huge fan of the first game. So it's a huge fan of that IP and that franchise, and I felt like I owed it to myself to play that game, but yeah, I didn't for one reason or another, which I guess leads into us talking about just our general impressions on having played it this time around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just for myself, yeah, I think this game still stinks. I think this game sucks, actually. I think, I mean, we're recording this a little bit later since I think we've played it, at least for myself. I beat it. So I'm not as raw in my feelings in this moment as I was if we would have recorded this a couple days ago. But in a general sense, yeah, I think this game sucks. I think this is one of the worst games we've ever played for Chapter Select. And I will get into great detail about why I feel this way as we go on with the episode. But I just feel like it's not even just, I think the core of the game is bad, but there's a lot of like little small nitpicky things that I also just cannot stand with this game. And I'll bring up some of those more later. And I don't think the game as a whole is unsalvageable or anything. I think there are some good aspects of it, but yeah, for the most part, this game sucks. I do not like this video game. Michael, is this still your favorite Banjo game?
No, it's not. It's not my favorite Banjo game. It is. I am probably way more positive on it than you are, though. The thing that I just don't like about it is that there's no reason to actually do any of the objectives that they want you to do. It's just, you're just doing them. And I'm like, okay, this is just what, like, I did not beat the game. I think I'm at 30 jiggies or something like that. And I've done like 2 or 3 of the boss fight things with Gruntilda or whatever. And I'm just like, this must just be the game. I'm at 30 jiggies. It's like halfway through the game. This must be what the game is.
That's the rest of the game, yeah.
Until the end. So that's the only thing. There's no like real draw to actually do any of the stuff that it's asking you to do. It's just like, oh, use these things to build vehicles to then finish these objectives. The thing that I do like about it is like I think you could get really creative with some of the vehicle stuff and like building something and then doing the objective that they want you to do. I found very satisfying. Like there was one time where there was like a hoverboat race and I just put like 3 medium engines on it and went super fast around it and like lapped everyone. I'm like, this is sick. Like this is really like that was great. But when it wants you to do certain things and you're like banging your head on stuff, it is so annoying and garbage and I hate it. So when it does, it has, in my mind, it has really high highs for like the satisfaction stuff, but when it's really frustrating, it is so unsatisfying, I just want to turn it off.
Max, what are your general thoughts on Nuts and Bolts here? Yeah, same.
It's interesting. I think up front, without having read or watched or done any research beforehand, this game feels like something that was designed one way and then Banjo was just added.
Yeah.
The old Star Fox adventures,
Exactly. Dinosaur Planet turned Star Fox. Turns out, allegedly, according to this video I saw that I think was included in Rare Replay, the original plan for this game was like, remake Banjo, and we don't want to do that. We'll have like AI Grunty and Banjo, and then you play as Banjo in the same world, and then that didn't work. And they're like, let's build cars. And it's like, it's actually a pretty neat game, mechanically speaking, of building vehicles and traversing these environments. But the fact that Banjo is, and all that entails, is just wrapped up in it, where it's trying to be a exploratory platformer, but car vehicle game, Like the two don't mesh. If
But
this was just
it's not even pushing you to explore either. Is the thing?
No,
it's like making you go to set points on the map to interact with people and do things. Yeah.
It's just go from A to B. Yeah. And they conflict with each other. And so that's the frustrating part. And it's like Michael said, there are some challenges where it's do this and it is so unnecessarily difficult. I think, we'll talk about it in the gameplay and stuff, but I think some of the vehicle handling type stuff is really terrible. But in general, this game just feels like an amalgamation, almost like the vehicles you're building itself, an amalgamation of parts. And I don't think it sticks any sort of landing or crosses any sort of finish line or floats across any body of water.
Let's to provide some context here, we're still going to rank the levels and talk about a couple other aspects of the game here in a little bit, but based on my own notes that I have here, I just kind of want to go down a list of the things that I think are wrong with this game. And I don't mean like dump them all out there at one point, but more just use them as jumping off points for us to have larger discussions. Sure. Because I think because there are a lot of problems in this game, and I think it's with a lot of the core elements of the game itself. Just for starters, like the story is terrible in this. Not that it needs.
It's non-existent.
Yeah,
like in my mind.
Yeah, it's just it's terrible. I like the opening. I like idea that Banjo and Kazooie haven't gotten to do anything for years because Grunty's just been dead. So they got fat and washed up. But then you introduce this character Log, the Lord of Games, who just appears out of nowhere and is like, hey, I know. What if I whisked you away to my world and you just drove a car all the time? How does that sound? It doesn't make any sense why he's showing up. I like the meta elements of this game a little bit, but that's almost something that was done in the previous games as well. So it's not even an aspect of this game exactly. I think some of the writing is still okay, but it's the overall story that is just... There's no point to it. Even Log himself whisks you away to this other world and is like, oh, here's this world. You can get into these doors if you have jiggies, and there's a big door at the top, and if you get that many jiggies, you can get in up there. And it's like, okay, well, is there any point to any of this? And he's like, oh, well, yeah, you can fight Grunty sometimes too. Okay, that's about it. See ya. There's no at least in the other games in Kazooie and Tooie, Grunty did a bad thing and they had to go out and in the first game she kidnaps Tootie. In the second game she starts nuking Jinjos and nuking bottles the mole or whatever. She starts killing people and they feel the need to go after her. And this, it's just hey, I'm gonna bring you to this world and you guys can just fight for old time's sake, I guess. It's what? Why? Huh? What is this?
Yeah, it feels like it's more of it's supposed to be a celebration of Banjo-Kazooie. That's what I feel like they're going for, and they kind of just fall flat on it, especially with all the worlds, right, that are in there. You got the Banjoland or whatever, you got the LOGBOX 720, right? Is that what it's called? All that stuff feels like celebrations of the game itself and stuff like that, and even the writing, especially in the beginning, seems like that's what it's supposed to be. But then you just end up, to celebrate it, you're going into to celebrate a platforming game, you're then building cars to destroy things. It's kind of weird.
Let's celebrate the past by doing these weird things that have nothing to do with Banjo-Kazooie in the slightest. What?
I think it's too self-aware. It breaks the fourth wall too much, and I think it's at a detriment. It's almost like a comedian that gets up on stage and then only makes fun of themselves in really bad ways. It's not a funny way that they poke fun at themselves.
There's a Mario reference in this game, isn't there?
There is.
Early on, they made it an Italian plumber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually don't like that Banjo and Kazooie are fat gamers that eat pizza.
I love it.
I think that's a funny jumping off point.
Banjo is a bro, and you could tell from his little shark tooth necklace.
Banjo is
definitely a bro.
I think that's a very funny jumping off point for a better story.
Sure.
If
if
that's
they had
the
gone
starting
somewhere
point,
with it, yeah. But I noticed a theme throughout of they had all these jokes about reusing assets or cutting content.
They even make callback literally the first thing you do in the game is it's like, oh, okay, we're going to make this a classic collectathon, and like a bajillion things appear on the screen at once, and they're like, go collect them, go.
Yes.
That was actually kind of funny.
I thought that was funny. Yeah,
I thought that was
that.
a little bit more funny because it was gameplay, like there was a gameplay aspect to it too, where
the
they
joke.
literally, yeah.
It's just it was like almost as if they were saying making games is hard and we're just going to reuse. There was one mission with Bottles where you go up and Bottles describes this thing you're going to do. I forget exactly what the thing was, but as soon as the mission starts, it's like, it's just another race. And he's like, whoops, I guess the devs ran out of time, so do a race for the 50th time. I'm like, no, please give me something different than the 3 different versions of a race you've given me before. It's so aware in, I think, the wrong ways. And the story, the ending is Grunty is packaging games.
Yeah, at Rare.
Yeah,
it's implied. And then she
It's
says
so
she's going to make a
weird.
new game that will be the one where she wins. So now she's become a game developer, and she's going to create a video game where she'll beat Banjo and Kazooie.
It's weird. It's so odd.
I think my other big problem with the story, and this was less of a issue that I had with the first game, but it is prevalent here. These games have these openings where it sets up the narrative and sets up what you're supposed to do in the game. And then there's nothing story-wise that really happens from the first cutscene until the end cutscene. And again, that's something that happens in the first game, but I think that's a little bit more forgivable in some senses because that's an N64 game and that was just a character platformer. So it's really not supposed to be focused on story. And this, I'm not saying I need Hideo Kojima linked cutscenes in this game or anything like that, but
something to move the plot along.
But
a little
that's
bit.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's such little context that there was multiple times in this game where I didn't even know what I was supposed to do. The Grunty fights are a good example of that, where it's just all of a sudden like, oh, now you're fighting Grunty. And it's like, well, why? Why is it
Like,
this
why
thing?
is Grunty
Like,
here now? Why?
Yeah,
am
why
I-
is Grunty showing up now? Why do I need to fight her now? What's even the? I mean, I get that she's the villain, but like, why are we just going at it for no reason? Yeah, like, and a lot of the there's a lack of contextualization as well when it comes to going to certain worlds within the hub world, because some areas I tried to go to, and again, we talked about this with the first game, Max, is that there's instances where you can't get to certain areas or unlock certain things because you haven't gotten abilities that you don't need, but the game does a poor job of conveying, hey, if you beat Grunty at each world, you're going to get a new ability for your cart that you can use in the overworld, and then that'll allow you to unlock new areas. So, like, I got enough. There was a point in the game where I had gotten enough Jiggies to unlock, like, the 4th level, but I couldn't unlock the 4th level itself because I hadn't gotten a certain upgrade for my car. And so I was trying to, like, deposit one of those sphere things to unlock the level itself, but I couldn't even get to where it was telling me to go because I hadn't beaten the Grunty that would give me that upgrade. But the game doesn't tell you that at any point because there's just no contextualization really at any point in this game.
Yeah, same thing kind of happened with me where, like, I think it was when you try to unlock the Coliseum level, and
Yes.
I just went into it like by happenstance. Like, I went and drove like around there, and then like the ball I was carrying like just randomly got sucked up by the magnet. I'm like, why is this doing this? It's like, obviously it must be doing something here. And then I think I was talking to you while I was doing it, Logan, and I was like, all right, I don't even know where to go. Yeah, you told me how to do it. I was like, why would they make you go into the lake to then go up it? Like, it never points you in that direction to be like, oh, go into the lake to go up the hill. Oh, yeah. I'm like,
I kept trying to climb that building next to the crane. I got the car up there and was trying to drive it and like find the switch, and there was nothing.
yeah.
Yep.
I'm like, this is kind of weird. Like, I don't.
But the game never even bothers to give you the slightest hint in that situation, which is fine. I don't mind games not giving you hints occasionally. It allows you to figure your own things out. But like when you're literally trying to unlock something that you can't unlock.
But there's not even designed to point you in that direction. It's it's just how it exists.
Yeah.
A couple other things. We'll just go down the list here of things I have written down, and we'll see if we want to have larger conversations about them. I think there's too many steps as well in this game, like unlocking all the levels. Like I would have liked if I just unlocked the level. Why do I have to deposit this sphere and do all this other stuff? Why do I have to earn jiggies in the levels and then go to a jiggy machine and then throw the jiggies in my car and then take the car to the jiggy deposit? Like that's just why is that a thing? Like, I get that they're wanting to incorporate the cars again. It all comes back to the cars. Please use your car. Please hop in your car as much as humanly possible. But, like, for stuff like getting the jiggies, like, I didn't understand why they kept making me do that. I don't know if you guys felt the same way.
It never bothered me, I guess.
Yeah, it's not like one of the more egregious aspects of the game. It was just something that I was like, why is this a thing? Like
if the jiggies would like constantly like fall out, if the physics of the game were like the jiggies are actually just loose things and they're not actually attached to your cart and they would just like flop around everywhere and then you'd have to because one example that would happen is like when you get the first ball, I think when I first got it, the ball like rolled off and then I had to go back up and grab the ball. And so if that were to happen with the jiggies every time I did that, if they like fell off like that, if they weren't stuck onto that cart like pretty well, that would have been atrocious. That would have been like the worst thing ever.
Because you're
luckily,
usually leaving the area with
I've,
like 5-7 jiggies.
Yeah. I've straight up like with like, I don't know, with like 3 or 4 jiggies, like jumped off of like the river bank thing and then off of the thing and like they didn't fall off. So it's like, okay. Like,
it is forgiving in that way for sure.
At least it's forgiving. It's, I don't know, it's fine. It's just,
I think the thing that amplified my annoyance about this was when the cops start showing up later. There's like a weird,
when did
like,
it become a GTA game?
Yeah, there's like a GTA aspect to this game. I don't know, Mike. You didn't get it as far into the game, so I don't know. I feel like
I just got to that.
Yeah,
like,
I feel like it starts ramping up.
That,
like all of a sudden, these cops just start appearing and just start crashing into you as you're trying to get the jiggies. And it's like, why is this a thing? Why are we just trying to block off the easiest thing here?
To me, like, especially in the beginning of the game, like the vibe of the game is just like, you know, oh, we're just doing this thing. We're, you know, celebrating Banjo-Kazooie. We're having a good time. And then to just add something like that where they're just trying to crash into you for no apparent
they're like, hey, what's
whatsoever.
A popular game? GTA 4 is real big right now. Let's throw some of that in here.
The thing that I didn't like is where they, like the placement of the dispensers of the actual jiggies. I hated those. Like the one for the Coliseum sucks. I hate where that one's placed. It's like it's caged in the building, and they put these fences over there, and there's a way where like you could get your cart like kind of stuck in the fences as you plow them down. I'm like, dude, this feels like why am I doing this? Why is this like this? That was like the one time where I was like, this is terrible. Like, why would they do that? And then also the one that's for Banjoland, where it's like off, like far away from any entrance of any of the other, like for their acts or whatever. Like, why is it out? Like, I don't know. Like, you have to drive pretty far. You have to drive over like the water to get to it.
Yeah,
it makes no sense why it's placed like that.
About the jiggies in particular, just it's interesting in a bad way that kind of, if you look back at Kazooie and Tooie, they kind of trailblaze may not be correct. I'm not quite sure historically like where it fit in, but like when you play those games, you grab a jiggy, you just collect it immediately. It's boom.
Yep.
You do a little jig and jingle, and you're good.
Yeah.
And you know that compared, and you stay in the world, and then you compared that at the time with Super Mario 64, and it was you went in and got 1 star, and sometimes you could collect other ones, 100 coins, the red ones, whatever. But then you would be spit out, and you'd have to jump back in, and so people would compare those one way or the other. And Banjo kind of led the way of you get to stay in the world and engage with it. But then Nuts and Bolts almost reverts back to a 64 Galaxy style approach of the world is now split into 5-6 different chunks, acts, which is environmentally interesting because you could change the lighting or daytime or whatever. And then there's jiggies within those acts that you could collect. But then, like Logan was saying, then you collect them in there. Then you got to cash them outside and then go deposit them in your little piggy bank. And I think it's interesting that the series almost reverts that way. And I wonder if it wasn't actually because of Super Mario Galaxy, which had come out a year prior in 2007. And this mechanic could have been incorporated then. If the game was announced in 2006, I don't know how long that dev cycle particularly was, but I mean, the game wasn't fully revealed until 2008, it seems, based off, according to my research.
I think, like early part of the year, and then it was on the latter part of the year.
Yeah, and so you look at a game like Galaxy, where it was praised for what it had done on the Wii and stuff, and it's hard not to imagine that they took inspiration from that, but then fused with this whole car thing, it turned out even worse.
Yeah. What was my train of thought? I wonder if like the reason why they designed like where the dispensers were, or like how they do that with the Jiggies where you have to dispense them, was so then you actually interact with that overworld, because otherwise you probably wouldn't interact with it at all.
But then why is there an overworld in the game? Like,
I mean, yeah. I'm not gonna.
I guess there's always been an overworld in the Banjo games, so I get that to a
have some
degree.
sort of hub world.
But it was like a poorly constructed. It's clearly trying to ape on like GTA or something like that. Like even outside of the cops trying to run into you constantly. Like it was clearly built with that sort of style in mind.
I just thought it was interesting that no one else is driving a vehicle. I guess until the cops show up. But for a game that is all about the vehicles, no one else is moving around in them outside of a race or mission involving other vehicles.
The game even yells at you if you get out of the car sometimes. It's like Log will be like one of the few things he will say is, hey, why are you running around? Go hop in a car. It'll work out better for you. Like that's one of the few things that the game does yell at you for, which is funny. Yeah, I think this is the biggest problem I have with it. This is probably the largest talking point I think we might have. I wrote down, this game shouldn't be called Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. This game should be called Mundane Tasks, the game. Like, the entire runtime of this game, I cannot think of a single activity in this game that I did that is memorable. Like, I collected all these Jiggies. I did all of these dumb little tasks for all the different people in all these different levels. I cannot think of really any of them that are super memorable. There are a couple that I can recall that I'm like, that was kind of interesting and unique. For the most part, though, like Max was saying, it's just like races and weird, like, shove a bunch of junk into this designated junk corner or something. Like, I don't know. It's like a bunch of, none of the tasks in this are interesting at all. And I think the interest level comes with building a car that can do the task. And that's supposed to be where the fun is, I'll put together my own vehicle that can do this. But they give you the blueprints to a lot of vehicles that can more than adequately complete these objectives that they're throwing at you. And I don't think that it ever really, the game doesn't ever really push you, I think, until maybe the later levels to do the building stuff very heavily. I was able to use the basic blueprints and maybe fine tune them a little bit here and there. Like throw an extra engine on this if I'm going to a race, or throw an extra gun on this if I need more firepower. Like just like small little tweaks like that here and there for vast majority of the game. And again, maybe you could say, well, if you would have had more fun if you built your own thing, but also if I'm able to get the dumb Trophy Thomas trophy with these small little tweaks I'm making to the basic blueprints, why would I do anything else? So, I don't know.
I actually really appreciate that they give you a library of blueprints, because this is a game they easily could have said you have to build your own thing every time or build off of it. But they thankfully give you a store, and they pretty handily just give you a bunch of blueprints too. But they also let you buy pretty much whatever you would need for any type of situation. I'm not in general a very creative person in games where you have to build or make something. And having the shop be there and generally having all the parts to make a vehicle work naturally as you play was a huge relief, because if you could also just take that blueprint from Wumba and then tweak it, like you were saying, Logan. Like you could get the helicopter with the magnetic ball beneath it and tweak that with more power or whatever you even need. And that relieved a creative pressure for me. The only time I felt truly pressured was the final boss having to figure out gun placement and things like that because they really force it on you pretty drastically there. But I was happy that they gave players an option.
Yeah, I feel like I'm with you in that, like, it is just a ton of mundane tasks, and I mean, this is just me, I guess, repeating what you guys are saying, but I feel like if you're not into the process of building these vehicles and stuff, like, to me, that was what made the experience memorable, is like, I'm building these things to complete these tasks, and that's the fun of it. And if you're not into that kind of thing, this game is very much not in your wheelhouse. Like, even for like the picking the blueprints and just tweaking them, I think that's good as like a especially if you're not good at that stuff. It's good to have those, but I think eventually, if you really want to have the fun with it, like building your own thing, seeing what goofy thing you can make and it actually work, I think is like what makes the game fun at all, because all it is it's all the same task in every single level. It's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
All the gun stuff sucks, by the way, but it's terrible. Yeah. I hate anything that had to do with gun combat. My least favorite one.
It's a good thing you didn't do the final grunty.
Yeah, racing was great. I thought I had fun with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think if you're not building, like, this is just gonna be a pretty average to not fun game. But I think the building aspect of it is what makes it really good. I think like I said, I think it's a pretty good game, and it's because of that kind of stuff.
I mean, the building is so fundamental to the game. I mean, it's the name of the game, essentially. Build, nuts and bolts. I think the building is good. Well, mechanically, I think they found a good spot with the rules of this world where, a wheel can go anywhere and a motor can go anywhere, and it just works. Like, if you slap the motor on the side of the vehicle, it gives power.
Mm-hmm. It just works. The classic Todd Howard quote. It just works.
Yeah.
And one of the great things about having a fully dynamic game engine is all of this just works. It's not, I'm not kidding.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach for this, because that also alleviates creative pressure. When I came to a challenge where I needed to create something, all I needed to focus on was getting just the types of parts somewhere on the vehicle. And that let me do some interesting things. I remember one challenge in particular. It's in Nutty Acres, and you had to protect this certain trophy from like flying attackers. And I tried the mission three times or so, flying and shooting, just trying to take them out, and it wasn't working. Shooting, not great.
I know the exact one you're talking about.
Yeah. So what I did, I built a tower, and but it had an opening on the front. But I built a tower out of heavy blocks, put 4 wheels and motors and gas on it to get up the hill, and I just drove over the trophy and just sat there for the 2 minutes or whatever of the clock. And the planes were kamikaze diving down, trying to take it out, but they couldn't get to it because I had positioned the vehicle where they couldn't hit it. And so that was a creative moment where it wasn't a blueprint. It was me just like, this is how I will solve this problem. And it gave me the tools without having to worry about this vehicle is clearly way too top heavy and like your wheels need to touch the engine. Like, none of that mattered. Yeah. It had cartoon physics, almost laws of physics, I should say. And that is freeing. So it's a really good building system, I think. But you have to enjoy what you're building toward. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
What's funny about that, though, again, is I kind of mentioned this with the blueprints, is like, why would you waste any time building something like you built, Max, when the game is giving you things kind of on a silver platter in a lot of instances that you can just use that they're giving you. For example, in that exact task or mission that you just talked about, if you just drive up the hill, right off to the left is a stationary turret that they put there next to that trophy that you're supposed to block, that you can just jump out of your car and then jump into that turret, and you can just look up at the sky and you can just shoot them all down. and that is just there by default. They just put that
I
there
did
for you.
never even saw that.
Yep, that's just sitting there. So you're just supposed to hop out it. So the car you choose in that level really doesn't matter because all you need to do is drive up the hill, hop out of your car, hop into the turret, and then you can just shoot up there. And that's it.
Huh.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, you built this wild contraption that accomplished the task and did what you were supposed to. I was just like, oh, hey, look, they gave me a free thing. I'll just jump in it here and complete the mission as well. So
I think that in itself is kind of neat that you guys were able to solve the same thing with different in a different way. But I think like the draw, and this is not like necessarily defending it or anything, but I think the draw for like doing that kind of stuff is just is playing it like an arcade game, getting the best times on stuff, which honestly I don't think would be fun in this game, but I see that draw, like that being a draw. Like there's the leaderboards and stuff like that, and I mean at the time that this game was coming out, Xbox 360 leaderboards were all the rage. So doing that kind of stuff would make sense, especially when it was much more active. I mean, now you get the leaderboards option, it's just like it's kind of dead or whatever. At least when I tried to click on it, it didn't really show anything.
It doesn't look like it's uploading new times because I couldn't see either of your guys' times.
Yeah.
But it does have a multiplayer mode where you would compete in challenges with your friends. So not just trying to get to the top of the leaderboard, but you could, theoretically, the three of us could have like done a race together. And that almost reminded me, Mike, of our like driver's license test in Gran Turismo, where it was like, I'm going to beat Mike. Now, we weren't choosing our cars or customizing. I know that's an option in like GT Sport or whatever, but I totally could see it where, well, Mike is faster than me. Like, I've got to tweak something on this vehicle. I've got to make it lighter. I've got to add a motor or something. So I do see it almost would have been a better like Diddy Kong racing type game, like a Banjo-Kazooie racing game, which it is. In the multiplayer aspect, but if it was only a Diddy Kong racing where you could fly, drive, or sail a boat around these worlds, it is. It's like Diddy Kong racing and Banjo-Kazooie and Minecraft all in one game.
Yeah, and I mean we're playing this game like how many years after its release, and
almost 15.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything active about this game whatsoever. So it's not like we could have actually really tried it.
Yeah.
Like at what it maybe was. I don't know how well the multiplayer. I highly doubt it did like super well, but I'm sure like in its first year or so, it was probably all right.
I'm looking it up here as we record, and it's just basically the same thing. Like you can complete in certain tasks, like do a race or do a thing where it's like a sumo. Like one of these is like completing like a sumo challenge, so a bunch of people get in like a ring and they gotta like blast each other out of the ring with whatever contraption they can make. And then there's other ones that are races, and then there's other ones that are dog fights, things like that.
Yeah, I do think that there is a version of this game, and maybe there is now because hundreds of thousands of games have come out, and I'm sure somebody has made something to this, but there is a version of this game that is actually really good, I think. And the problem with this is that they strap, maybe not that they strapped the Banjo-Kazooie name, because it sounds like they used, like this was their vision for this game, was for the Banjo-Kazooie game, was this kind of. But I think there is a really interesting thing here. I just don't think, one, I'm not the audience for it necessarily, but two, they just kind of they just strapped this like story mode on it when they could have just made this a really fun arcade experience. Yeah. Like that's where my head was at the entire time. Like if this was just like an arcade game where they had like, oh, here's the racing mini game and you have like a bunch of different tracks and you have to build your own car in order to do this, and then you do time trial modes of that and just do that. Like that would be pretty fun to do that, Or here's the domino thing, which I think sucked, but here's the domino thing, and you have to crash into it and figure out a way to knock out all these dominoes, and how fast you do it and how many dominoes you do will determine your leaderboard score or whatever. Like that kind of stuff is really fun, but to have it baked into a story mode, one, makes no sense, and two, is it just draws out the story mode that is just like there's nothing like really reeling you into it at all other than
Right.
these games. So it just becomes uninteresting. But
I think the cherry on top of this bad Sunday of all the troublesome things that we're talking about with this game is something Max mentioned earlier, which is the driving in this game is just bad. They made a game all about driving, and the driving sucks. It's horrible.
I disagree.
I think it
actually.
feels terrible, and I think the thing that makes it feel even worse is the clipping. It is so easy to clip into other objects and other cars.
The clipping is bad.
It's
I will say
really
that.
terrible. Like, especially the races when you're like on tight tracks and you're kind of bumping up against other people. That's awful. Like, that is objectively awful.
I will not disagree with that.
I think the driving feels pretty darn bad. And it's very, like, you can get used to it and you kind of start to understand how it works and stuff. Like, the helicopters are weird to control, but like you kind of learn how it works and you get used to it. I think the general driving of the cars, though, specifically, just does not feel good. It feels very blocky. It feels very much like you're just, I don't know. It does not feel like you have any maneuverability in any of the vehicles that you make in this game, even the ones that are...
I think the racing cars, the ones that were titled as that, I thought felt fine. I thought that, I mean, obviously it's not like I'm playing Forza or something like that, or I guess at the time Project Gotham Racing or whatever was around at that time, but it's not like I'm playing one of those games.
Forza would have been around at this point, I think.
I think so, yeah. I think Forza 2 would have been out. I don't even think Project Gotham Race, I think that was done by then. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, I think the driving, like the racing car stuff was fine. The helicopters were not great. But I thought like the airplane flying stuff was fine, and I thought the general driving was fine. I thought initially the initial kart driving was what was bad, I thought, and it leaves a really bad first impression. And if they just given you a car that handled better like those racing cars, I think it would have been fine from the beginning, but they don't do that. So
yeah, my biggest issue with the navigation of vehicles was the clipping that Logan talked about. If you even nudge a rock, you bad. Get spun out, you're stuck,
do a
you're
front
done.
flip or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
just
it's
hit restart.
crazy.
If you even get close to another racer, you will both lock and just do like a hard 90-degree turn in either direction and spin. Like, you can't touch anybody. My bigger problem was the flying. I wrote, flying is like trying to steer an inner tube covered in oil and shaving cream on a frozen lake. Like, the flying is just like all over the place. You just hard bank if you even touch the stick. I did not care for the flying missions at all.
The flying I thought it was fine. It's anytime I had to use a gun on a vehicle was the time I was like, please no. I want nothing to do with guns on vehicles in this game.
This is no Twisted Metal.
No.
Is there anything else specific that you guys want to talk about before we maybe get into talking more about the levels specifically and maybe ranking them? I know there is one thing. Well, maybe you and I can just touch on this briefly here, Max, because I know Mike didn't beat the game. Just how did you feel about the ending stuff? I
did look it up.
The final world, because that final boss is terrible, but I think the things that happen before it are also terrible. Like, the game is even self-aware to the point where it's like, how can we fit a quiz in the end of this Banjo-Kazooie game? And they make you take part in a 6-part trial, and then they make you answer questions in the middle of this.
Okay, here's what I'll say. I looked this up. I'm like, thank the Lord I did not beat this game. I don't think I could stomach what they made you do in the end of that game.
I was screaming. I'll say this. My funniest anecdote about the end of the game. It was like 2:30 in the morning when I beat this, and I was slowly losing my mind against the final boss, because it is so that last. I didn't have any problem with the final boss except for the final one where she hops on her dumb broomstick and starts flying around. I was literally screaming at my TV like, this is what you did. This is the final thing you did with this IP rare. Like, I was like screaming mad in the middle of the night because I realized that this is the final thing that has ever involved Banjo-Kazooie in the past 15 years, is this dumb boss fight that is so horrible in this dumb final trial, and it's literally the last thing that those characters have ever done, other than like whatever appearing in Smash, I guess. But that is the last thing that we have seen Banjo-Kazooie do, is that stupid fight. And it like literally, it made me so mad that is how the franchise has ended at this point, is that. Like when you look back on the last thing that Banjo-Kazooie ever done, it's that. It's so... Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Max.
It's a terrible fight. It's a whole terrible thing. Initially, people had told me, I think including you, Logan, you were like, get ready, the final world, you have 6 challenges. I was prepared for 6 different markers on the map. Mm-hmm. Thank goodness it's just 2. Go to log, and he makes you do 6 easy things, and then you fight Grunty in a 5-phase or 4-phase fight. I think it's 5.
I think it's 5, yeah.
My problem, Logan, and you've laughed at me for this, is I just thought if you beat Grunty, credits will roll.
Oh.
You have to beat Grunty and get the Jiggy for credits to roll. And so I got through all of her phases except for the broom, fine and dandy. But at that point, I had lost my wings. And so I couldn't fly anymore. And I didn't have... I had the homing missile, because Logan said, get the homing missile. But the homing missile does not just go straight there. It's almost like a really terrible red shell.
But it's better than the alternatives, because yes, I don't know how many times
but it would just, what it would do is go towards her and then just go wide and fly around her in a circle that would never close. And so the missiles would never hit her. And so I drove up to the top of Spiral Mountain and would wait for her to be in the line of sight on the same level and like fire and hopefully hit her. And that took about half an hour. And then I beat it, and it was like, well, sorry, you need to do it better.
Max literally messaged me as soon as he beat it. He's like, wow, I did it. It took me 20 minutes or something. And then I was like, oh, well, then you didn't do it. And he's like, wait, what?
Because credits didn't roll. They just made fun of me and said, nah, you got to get the Jiggy. And so then I tweaked the vehicle and added an automatic like bird missile and homing, and I took better care of my wings. I couldn't see
Max's face, but I felt like his soul definitely left his body when he learned that.
It did. It absolutely did. And the ending is just so stupid. You know, you're like back at your house, Grunty's packing up boxes. It's a big old bummer.
And all the other bosses are just as bad. One of them is play water polo. One of them is just tip Grunty over, and you do. Multiple ones of them are actually just tip Grunty over.
Tip Grunty over, or take something out of her vehicle.
Yeah. I did 3 of them, and they're not great.
Yeah, they're not fun.
Yeah,
which you would think they would try to find a way to make them a little bit more fun, because this is the only game in the series, to my knowledge at least, where you're fighting Grunty multiple times.
Well, you know, it's kind
outside the end battle, and they don't do anything with it really.
Saying this now actually reminds me. Earlier, when you mentioned Game Informer, was when you became aware of it. I started doing a deep dive to try and find the issue. I think it may have been May 2008. The cover game was Gears of War 2. But anyway, like right before that magazine came out, NeoGAF and GameFAQs and stuff were talking about a leak from Game Informer. And a quote was that Rare said there were 15 different challenges spread across 6 different levels. Well, that sounds about right. But I'm wondering if those 15 different challenges includes each variation of fighting Grunty, because one of them is like take something out of her vehicle. One is tip her over. One is a water polo. So that beefs up the different types of challenges, because really the different types are races, fighting, and pushing things or moving things out of the way, fluffing up their own count.
Yeah. There's just not much in this. Like I said, there's really not a lot of depth. The tasks they make you do throughout the entire game are very bland and boring.
Yeah.
There's a couple other things that I want to touch on here in a bit. We'll talk about, obviously, the legacy of this game, and maybe talk about the music and stuff like that in just a second. I do want to rank the levels, though, really quickly. So this is something we have been doing to catch Michael up to speed. We've decided to rank all the levels and all the Banjo games throughout the course of Season 3E here. So we did this in our first episode with Banjo-Kazooie. You can go listen to that episode if you haven't already. But the levels here in Nuts and Bolts, there's not many. There is Showdown Town, which is the main hub world. There's Nutty Acres, LOGBOX 720, Banjoland, Jiggosseum, which is such a weird thing to say, the Terrarium of Terror, and Spiral Mountain. I will come out. I would like to rank these way more quickly than we did the last time around, because that took a lot of time previously. Michael, what was the last level you played out of curiosity in this game? Did you say you got to the Jiggosseum?
Jiggosseum.
Okay.
And I mean, like, I technically saw Spiral Mountain in the very beginning of the game. So realistically, the only one I didn't see is Terrarium of Terror.
Okay, well, I have news for you. That's probably the worst one. I hate that level. I think the bottom
is atrocious.
I think the bottom three for sure is Terrarium of Terror, Spiral Mountain, Showdown Town. I think those are terrible. I think Showdown Town's a bad hub world. I think Spiral Mountain is like nostalgic, and I guess it's cool to see it.
It's ugly, though. They've made Spiral Mountain very ugly.
What you are doing there is also just abysmal, like we just talked about. Final boss sucks, and then the little 5 or 6 level trial there also is terrible. So it's like, I would say that's the bottom 3 for sure, in my opinion. I don't know where you're at with that, Max.
I wouldn't disagree.
Okay, the worst is Terrarium of Terror. And the problem with that one is that they are spheres, like all placed around. And so really the only way to truly get anywhere is fly, and like the helicopters. And
there's no cohesiveness to it at all.
There's no flow to it.
There's no most disjointed level, for sure.
I like the theme idea of it. Plants, aliens. It's kind of an interesting mix. But structurally, that level has no flow. It's chunky. It's chopped up. It's not good.
I think that one's dead last for sure. And I know, Michael, you can't speak to that, but trust us.
I'll trust you.
It's very, very bad, because I remember unlocking that level and I was getting a little bit burnt out with all the others. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I unlocked the final level. I hope that this one's actually at least a little better. It was not better.
My thing with your Spiral Mountain and Showdown Town is Spiral Mountain is just, it's a nostalgia trip, and you're absolutely right about what you're doing there is not great. I do think Spiral Mountain is very ugly now. I think it's very drab and dirty. It's nothing like what it was on N64, and I guess that's part of the point. Too. Like, time has passed, but they've made it pretty ugly. But I think that the penultimate worst level is actually the Jiggosseum. It is an oval.
That one's pretty bad.
There is no sports is the theme, but it is just an oval.
Yeah.
There is no, that's like we ran out of ideas for a world design, so we will make a Coliseum. I think it's weak.
How do you guys feel about LOGBOX 720?
It's not great, but it's probably top 3.
Because
being honest.
out of the ones that I played, that one was probably my least favorite.
It's too vertical. It is all vertical.
It's way too vertical, and I don't think there's any semblance of like logic of how you're supposed to even go around that thing.
There's no flow to like, how do I get up here?
Let's just let's just say this. I think all of these are pretty bad. If I'm being honest,
I think Banjoland is kind of neat.
Banjoland is the only level I truly walked away liking, and most of that is nostalgia.
I was gonna say, it's total nostalgia.
Exactly.
I think Banjoland is the best in the game, but I also hate that it totally relies on nostalgia. Like, it's very much just go around to the separate parts of this map.
I don't know. I like playing soccer on the at the Stonehenge thing or whatever.
There is one motorcycle trick thing that you can do on Banjoland that I kind of had some fun with.
They had a race there. I think I like.
I don't think that level's good, but it's better than the others. I will say it's the best one, I would say.
If you'll allow me, Logan, I think Banjoland is actually a really good point to bring up the music.
Go for it, yeah.
Because Banjoland is the only music I really liked in this game.
I thought all the music was good in this game. I liked all the music in it, personally.
A lot of the music just felt like repackaging the hits
maybe it's
a
a little
style.
I was gonna say maybe it's a little different for me because I did not play the first game like how you guys are playing all of them, so it might be a little different for me. So coming back to it, it's like, oh, this music's right. It's Grant Kirkhope music. Like, this is
I mean, in that sense, like, banjo music is largely good, and I do not think that this score is bad. Grant Kirkhope makes good soundtracks.
Yeah,
and I
turns
think
out.
that he does that here as well. But it is very much more, I mean, you talked about it before, Mike, how this game is in some ways like trying to like pay homage to the older games. And I really do think that a lot of the music in this game is pulling almost too heavily from the previous soundtracks.
I would argue that they're basically the same songs, just that they have better audio equipment now, and they just
There is original music in the game for sure.
Yeah.
But
It's,
yeah,
I think
don't know.
my Banjo-Kazooie music stands out. It's very front and center. And sometimes that's to its detriment, I think, especially in the sound design department. Like some of the sounds just get annoying very quickly. But the music was always bold and kind of used unique instruments to make a unique sound. And this just feels very subdued,
Yeah.
very muted, very quiet. Like there's no boldness to it.
it is not in the forefront at all.
Right. You do not, they don't want you to even really know it's there. And the only
If
time
you made
is
somebody play Banjo-Kazooie
My
nowadays,
my
like,
memory of that game is like you start off, you're like "Dun, dun, 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 dun." Like that's what happens at like every time you play it.
I mean, if you could introduce somebody to Banjo-Kazooie right now in 2022, and I think that would still be one of their big takeaways is the music. Like it's so
Yeah.
hard to play that game and not come away with some sort of feelings on the soundtrack.
Yeah, and this one is just so muted. But Banjoland stands out again because the whole world leans on that whole world, not the world we live in, but that game world relies so heavily on nostalgia that a lot of the themes shine through. And I just like the way that they wove all these different level themes together into one big world theme
Yeah.
for Banjoland. And I that was really well done, I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so Banjoland we got first. I think we'll get back to the bottom of the list in a second. I think based on what we're saying here, it sounds like we think that Nutty Acres is probably like the second best. It is not good, but it is not horrible. It's
Yeah.
way more cohesive than the others, and there are different like aspects to it that stand out a little bit to me. Like, oh, you got the volcano up here, you got the airplane ramp, you got the water parts that you can run around. There's a little bit of diversity here, especially once you get a little bit into the further, like you unlock the fifth. I don't even know what they call it, fifth level or sixth level.
Act.
Yeah, the act. They start making you do some different things here, and you start to realize like, oh wow, there's a lot more that you can actually do here on Nutty Acres, especially compared to some of the other levels.
I
I just wish it had a better gimmick is all. It's just kind of
Yes.
whatever, you know?
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's like I have like distinct issues with some of the other levels in this game. This one I don't really have a problem with. It's just
Yeah.
kind of
it's a good
There.
first level for, and it
Yeah.
has, I think importantly for this game, it has different types of terrain. You've got the
Yeah.
hilly, grassy plain area, you've got the beach and the water, you've got the volcano with its different steeps and slopes, plus lava, and then obviously
they make
the
you take part in
sky.
some flying stuff, and I think even the sky here is cool because they've got the clouds that are like attached to like lines and
Wire.
stuff like that. Yeah, like it's got a little bit of a unique design to it, I think, as well.
It's a solid intro levels for the design of this type of game. So yeah, I agree with it being ranked number 2.
So then what would we say is third? Because I think Spiral Mountain sucks. Jiggosseum sucks.
I think
LOGBOX,
I personally think
guess?
Showdown Town would be next.
Really?
I think Showdown Town would be next too.
Not
Okay,
because what you're doing there is very interesting. It's mostly driving to different places. But I do like as you beat Grunty, you unlock more parts on your car and you get to navigate and kind of peel back more of this world and get to different places. And I think that's just what's interesting. My big problems with Showdown Town is just it's too populated with characters that just run into you and don't
Yeah,
do anything. Like no one's
The
driving.
cops annoyed me so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a product of the time in a way, just because of like, you know, like you said, GTA was so big at the time. I mean, it's big now.
Still.
It's big since 3
I
basically.
mean, GTA
and-
4 came out in 2007, though, I believe.
Yeah,
So this would have been 2000. Yeah, like GTA 4 was all the
Yeah.
rage at that moment. So
yeah, and like having those big open worlds and stuff like that was like all the rage at that time, especially at that time. So, and having like a live city was cool. So I get why they did it. What I don't like about it is that it's literally just all rhinos basically, and then the cops. So it lacks the personality of those kind of things in a way.
GTA 4 came out April of 2008, so it came out like 5 months before this game.
Okay. So
Yeah, but I mean, like,
GTA was around beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like GTA was new. I thought that was kind of interesting looking up that date.
Yeah, it was more like the open world craze. Like, you know, you had your true crimes. You had your
this was definitely when open world started becoming really big.
But I think Showdown Town would be third, because it's not as offensive as what we have afterward.
Okay, I'm fine with that. And I do agree that once you start to unlock more of the things, there are some aspects of the town that I did enjoy exploring and uncovering to a degree. I guess LOGBOX 720 in the middle. Again, I do not think this level is good, but I do not hate it in the way that I do Jiggosseum or
I think it has a
Spiral
way
Mountain.
cooler gimmick than Jiggosseum does.
Yeah, at least
Yeah.
it has personality.
Yeah, it's got a personality to it.
Yeah, it's
I
got
like that
grabbed
they
by
had
the
this,
ghoulies on it.
Yeah, it's
so-
got grabbed by the ghoulies. I like that it had the Banjo-Kazooie disc spinning. I thought that was neat. Like, when I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then, did they have any... No, Viva Pinata wasn't out yet, right? Or was it out?
I think it was out. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Viva Pinata
I think
disc.
they had a Viva Pinata thing in there. Also, they had a weapon on there called Fulgor's hand or something. Is that supposed to be Fulgor from Killer Instinct? And is that supposed to be his hand?
Probably.
I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't know
know.
anything about Killer Instinct personally.
Killer Instinct is a rare game.
Yes,
Probably
I do
is
know
then.
that.
So I was wondering that. I didn't check what his hand looked like, but I was like, is that supposed to be the Fulgor? But I would assume so.
LOGBOX 720, I will say, is just so hard to get around. Like, yes, the whole level is definitely made for flying, but even when you are flying, there's constantly something in your way in this level.
Yeah.
'Cause
It
you
is
can't
just
see
an
above you, so
It is-
you're
yeah.
bumping up into stuff.
Also, it's like the first level, like where you even get to unlock any sort of flying thing. So you're learning flying in this like mass, like super complicated, weird, unorganized
maze.
level.
It's
Yeah,
just
like-
it's just a big vertical cube box that you're stuck in with like a little different weird things going on certain levels. There's no there's a major lack of cohesion in this level, but Terrarium of Terror is way worse in that regard because everything's siloed in
Segmented,
different
yeah.
areas.
Which like Jiggosseum, I think, has like the opposite problem where it is pretty easy to get around because it's so barren, but it has a really boring gimmick. So.
I will say that the one thing I will say in favor of Jiggosseum over Spiral Mountain, I think Spiral Mountain's worse. I would like to put Spiral Mountain at 6th personally, rather than 5th, because I think Jiggosseum, the one redeeming quality of it is that there are some fun things to do. I like the ramp, jumping off of that. It's very basic, but I did try to build as fast of a car as I could for a while there and blast off that ramp. There's one mission later on where you just have to get a bunch of basketballs and drop them in hoops, and it's very simple to do. I think I even got the Tommy trophy for that one. But I kind of enjoyed it. There's the Dominoes one was weird, but it was also kind of unique in some ways.
It was unique. I got excited when I saw that. I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be so fun!" And then I did it, and I'm like, "This is terrible. Like, why did they do this?"
I think Jiggosseum as a level, like just the design of it, sucks. But I will say the redeeming quality is when I think of some of the more memorable tasks in this game, they are tied to this level. Would be my defense of it. So
I feel like this is the level that they kind of got into. Okay, I'm gonna make a comparison that might not make sense, but where they were getting into like burnout quality of stuff where you're just crashing into stuff, and like it gets into that moment of like, oh, it could, like, that was where I find out I'm like, this could be like a burnout game. You could build your own stuff and you could crash into stuff, and it's just like everything's flying everywhere, and you're just like, whatever, like crashing a car into dominoes sounded like I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna jump off this giant ramp. And then when I did it, was like, well, it was kind of like a wet fart kind of thing, you know?
The best thing to do with the domino one is just attach explosives on your car, and then as a helicopter, drop into the middle of them, and then hit the self-destruct button. and explode outward. That's
but
what
what you need to be
There
listening
you
to certain
go.
songs though, Logan.
Yeah, go watch the YouTube video we attached above in our chat, Mike. Link it down in the comments below if you want to see this guide that we used for this.
It'll be in the show notes.
As Max said, it's art from a long forgotten era of YouTube. Okay, so I'm putting that one at 5 because I do literally seriously think that one has some redeeming qualities. Which means Spiral Mountain goes to 6. I'm sorry, Spiral Mountain. It's just the things you do on that level suck. That boss fight is, bar none, probably the worst thing in the game. So I really think it deserves to go that low. With that in mind, if we're ranking the levels from this game, then it goes Banjoland first, Nutty Acres second, Showdown Town third, LOGBOX 720 fourth, Jiggosseum fifth, Spiral Mountain sixth, and the Terrarium of Terror seventh. So yeah, basically, Mike, you not getting the Terrarium in Spiral Mountain is only
You saved yourself.
on your end. Congratulations.
Great.
I think we've mainly touched on everything, unless I am wrong. Otherwise, I would like to talk about what we think this game's legacy is. Max, is there anything you wanted to talk about beforehand about the game itself, maybe before we start?
Not specifically, no. Really, my only comments left are legacy related.
I can start here. I think because I kind of mentioned it before.
When
This
you were
game does
raging
suck.
at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, this game does suck. And it makes it that much more frustrating to me that this is literally the last Banjo game we've ever gotten. Like, this game sucks so bad that when people say they want a new Banjo game, they say, I hope that we get hear that Banjo 3E is announced soon. And people are like, oh, well, there is a third Banjo game. And it's like, no, there's not. People like to just, myself included, like to just pretend that this does not exist in a lot of ways. Like, I think that is this game's legacy in some ways, is that not only is the game itself just not good and not fun to play and is pretty boring, it's so bad that people like to just not even acknowledge that it's part of the larger Banjo series, and they still hope that we get something else in the style of the old games eventually. And I think that's how I feel too. I think a lot of times I think the general public's feelings on certain things is somehow gets misconstrued over the years, or gets like people like the general consensus among larger audiences for certain games or movies or different pieces of media, I think can get really warped based on how the general public can talk about it. But no, I think the general public is spot on with how we all talk about this game. It is not great. And yeah, it bums me out that this is seriously the last thing we have gotten Banjo related in the last 15 years or so, no matter how much we keep yelling at Microsoft and Rare to do something else with the IP. So, Mike, your thoughts?
I think, I'm kind of slightly opposite of you. I do think the game has redeeming qualities, and I do enjoy my time with it. I will play more of it. I'm going to beat it. But, because I was playing it a little bit before we were recording, and I was like, oh, this is like a real fun, like, I'll turn a podcast on, I'll just do a couple challenges, call it a day. And I'm having fun doing that. But in terms of its legacy, yeah, I mean, it is the, like the forgotten stepchild kind of thing or whatever, where, people don't recognize it really. And that's totally, like, it totally makes sense. Like I said, I think it has its redeeming qualities. It was made at a time I feel like Rare was trying to do weird new things. Like you had stuff like Viva Pinata, and they were kind of on like a downward spiral kind of thing here too, where like they had Perfect Dark Zero, and what did they do before? Was it Cameo before that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Cameo, Perfect Dark Zero. Then they did Viva Pinata, which I think is a good game. I think that's a great game, actually. And then this, and then just continuing down from, like, after this, it's like, I mean, what has Rare really done?
Now, yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
so, like, me and Max actually looked this up the other day before we recorded, and in some ways it's really ominous when you look back at what Rare was doing, because, like you said, like, they did, like, Perfect Dark Zero and Conquer Live and Reloaded and Viva Pinata.
That's right.
They were doing some different things for a couple of years there. This game came out. There was a 2-year span where they didn't release anything, and then they came back, and they were the Kinect studio.
Yeah.
So this game almost feels like it cursed Rare in a sense.
In a way, yeah. I mean, now they have Sea of Thieves, which, again, like, I did review that game for DualShockers, actually, and it didn't open up very well, but now it's obviously a beloved thing, and it worked out, and maybe Rare's now on the upswing on stuff, but I don't think this game is bad, and I don't think it deserves the, like, this is what cursed Rare and all that stuff, because I don't think it's a bad game at all. Like, in comparison to some other studios that have come out with really bad games and totally have been fine with it. I mean, you could look at something like No Man's Sky. Like, those guys were even able to, salvage something out of that garbage heap that when it first came out, which I actually liked it when it first came out. Anyway, but yeah, it's very interesting that this was the game that kind of ended Rare from regularly coming out with bangers, kind of. I mean, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's Cameo that actually kind of started it, or Perfect Dark Zero. Actually, Cameo's fine. It was a launch game. It is what it is, But like Perfect Dark Zero was not good, and it was like one of the most, I don't know, like anticipated games from I can remember when, as an Xbox 360 player at the time. That was the thing that I think started kind of like the downhill trend thing. And then they got Viva Pinata, which was like such a weird thing, but I think is a really great game. And I think is like one of the more beloved Rare stuff that is even out now. And then they came out with this, which is like when people are looking for a Banjo-Kazooie game, they're now looking for a building game. They're looking for, a character platformer. Like, and that's just what it is. So it's really interesting to see it as like this weird game that is just kind of the last thing that Rare did until like really Sea of Thieves, so
Killer Instinct, I guess, would be the other notable thing they did.
But didn't they not like?
Yeah,
that was like a co-developed thing, right? Because
yeah.
Iron Galaxy, like, didn't they do the brunt of
Helix
it?
did it too. They helped on it, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Solely develop it or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Killer Instinct, great game. That was actually a really good fighting game. Or it turned out to be one, because I think at first I wasn't really into it. But anyway, yeah.
Maxwell, your thoughts?
I think this is one of those games that stick with me here. It reminds me of Below, that Capybara game. And I reviewed that for DualShockers. And that was a game where, and Logan was our reviews editor at the time, which I think is important context. But I was reviewing that game and I got to a wall and it was like, Logan, I cannot get past, like, I'm done. I need to review this. And I was shooting for a low score. I don't remember exactly what it was. Say it was a 4 out of 10. And Logan told me to keep pushing and kind of not worry so much about the embargo or getting it out sooner or whatever. He's like, keep pushing. And I did. And I got deeper into the game and further and found the parts of it that I really enjoyed amongst what I thought was poor design at the time. And actually ended up giving it a 6 out of 10. And it's one of the games that still sticks with me, that I think if I reviewed it again today, especially if I had reviewed it on hardware that was more stable at running it, because I played on a base Xbox One. If I had played that on a Series X or a One X at the time, I think I would have given that game like an 8 out of 10 or something like that. And I'm not saying that Nuts and Bolts is an 8 out of 10, but the more I played Nuts and Bolts, the initial was like, this is not good. Why is Banjo fat? Why am I designing cars? Like, what? This is not what I wanted. But the more I played it, the more I saw the good parts in it. The tools that they give you to build cars and design things. There are nuggets of good, fun game design in here. The problem was that Banjo was grafted onto it. And I think it kind of boils down to this one point that I wrote down in my notes. Is if you look at a game like Breath of the Wild or Just Cause 3, they gave you tools to engage with a world that then reacts to those tools and what you do. The world reacts back. Nuts and Bolts gives you tools, but in a world that is not reactive. You're in a sandbox that doesn't react. But Just Cause 3, you're flying around shooting. You could attach rockets to a cow and it'll fly and spin around and react and blow up in the world. In Banjo-Kazooie, the world doesn't do anything. The cars do, but nothing. And so I think the legacy of this game was like they were close, but they missed it. And one decision as far as just pushing the vehicle stuff onto you, but in a way that wasn't engaging beyond designing the vehicles, I think is what really makes this game miss in the long run. And then with the Banjo stuff on top of it, it's too different from the rest of Banjo. And I get that Banjo was in racing games and vehicles are a part of Banjo's history, but it's just off enough that I think it overshadows a lot of the good in the game.
You said Just Cause 3, and I was like, wait, when did Just Cause 2 come out? Because, like, that was the big...
That's a good point.
Because, like, before that, like, what you were saying about, like, a more interactive world and stuff, like, really, I think that's why GTA was so beloved, like, GTA 3, why that ended up being so beloved. If you play GTA 3 now, it's, like, whatever. It's probably garbage.
And you're saying you don't like the remastered definitive edition version of the game?
Probably not.
Just Cause 2 came out March 23rd of 2010. So
exactly.
2 years after.
So, like, and before, like, this, it was really just, like, GTA games and GTA clones. Like, I always say True Crime Streets of LA. That's the one that I played a lot of. But Driver, like, that kind of stuff. And then if you look at that, how much could you actually interact with those worlds? And then look at this game, which came out 2008, that allowed you to, like, create your own stuff and to, like, put something that was yours into its world, if that makes any sense. Yes, I think the worlds are barren and there's not really a lot of liveliness to it, but it does give you the tools to, like, kind of interact with it, at least at the time, in, like, interesting ways. Now, going into Just Cause and just, like you said, Just Cause 3, like, Just Cause 2, I remember being, like, this huge thing because you were able to interact with the world in such, like, crazy ways that were not really being done at the time, like giving you the tools to do all, like, it kind of changed stuff, like, for those kind of open world games, especially when they started adding, like, the multiplayer mod stuff. That was getting pretty wild. But yeah, I mean, again, it's just being so disconnected from it, and then going back to it, it's like, well, yeah, obviously this seems like garbage because we are so used to playing games that are so, like, you are ingrained into a world and you, like, feel like you're kind of, I'm going to use really corny language and say, like, feel like that you're there and stuff like that. You can actually interact with stuff, even in something like a No Man's Sky. Like, you're able to actually craft, like, the terrain that is in front of you. You can explore all these things and whatever and really make it your own. Whereas, like, this, you're kind of just like, I built the car and I could drive around in the world and whatever and all that kind of fun stuff. So, I mean, it's putting that, I guess, into perspective. But again, like, I think this is, like, a weird thing of, like, Rare trying to do weird stuff because they've been trying to do weird stuff, like, especially for those, like, 5 or so years, and they missed the mark one too many times, and then this was the one that really kind of missed a bit, and then they became a Connect studio.
The last thing I want to say about this personally, I know I kind of said my piece already, is, yeah, I don't think this game is like this. Like, if I was to review this, I don't think I would give it, like, a 3 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10. Like, I don't think this game is, like, so bad or unforgivable that it is, like, a sin. Like, I joke that it cursed Rare. I don't think it's just a very mediocre, it's almost more one of those instances where it's worse that the game is boring more so than it is bad. Mm-hmm. And I have some legitimate issues, as we've talked about over the course of the episode here. So it's not just that it is a boring, bland game. There are some serious problems here. But also, just moment to moment, what you were doing in this game is just never engrossing or fun. And so I think it is the biggest problem with the game is that it is boring. So yeah, I don't think it's a sin against humanity or even a sin against the Banjo series, but when you do look back at what this franchise has been up to and you see that this is the last thing that has happened, it leaves a definite sour taste in my mouth, and I wish someone would come along, Rare or otherwise, that would fix that. And I know we're obviously not playing it for this season or anything, and I know they've done stuff like Yooka-Laylee, which kind of tried to fill this character platformer niche or audience here in recent years. They did an okay job of that, but yeah, I think that's largely Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts.
What I have a question. What would you have? I mean, maybe you guys don't do this, but what would you have given this? Like, what score would you have given it now that you've completed it?
Probably like a 5 or 6 personally.
Yeah.
I don't like giving scores anymore, but probably a 5 out of 10 because it's like I said, like there's good in it, but it's also pretty drab. It's interesting to look at the scores and stuff too back then. I mean, it has an average of 79, so it is
I
mixed.
probably if it's the same thing like this and I don't hate the end, I would be at like a 7 probably for me.
And it's too bad the end gets worse. Fun fact.
Yeah.
Fun fact. Giant Bomb gave it a perfect score. So there you go. Thanks, Brad. I think that was him, and I think
it was him.
I think G4 gave it a 4 out of 5. And they said Nuts and Bolts has solid single player, but multiplayer has even more potential, making this Banjo-Kazooie game worth a buy.
Game Informer was 8.5 out of 10.
So that's what I say. Like when you think about it at the time, like what this game was, it probably was pretty wild at the time. But looking at it now with all the knowledge we have of all this with post Minecraft, like that kind of stuff, like obviously this is nothing even compares to it,
It's exasperated by the fact that, like I said, we've had literally nothing else Banjo in the last 15 years. So when you look back and you're like, oh, what's Banjo been up to? Oh, nothing. This is the last game that released, and it's not really a true Banjo-Kazooie game in a lot of ways. That sucks because then, I mean, we really haven't gotten a true Banjo-Kazooie game in 20 years. So
I mean, other than Sea of Thieves, we haven't really gotten another rare game like in the traditional sense since this game. Yeah, really. So,
and I want to have a larger discussion with you at the end of this season, Max, about maybe what the future of Banjo can hold, but we'll have that discussion in later episodes. As for this episode, Michael, thank you for joining us to talk about Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts. Thanks for having me. Thanks for playing this with us. I thought for sure that this would be an episode where we would not be able to get a guest. But
we've gotten Michael to play nuts and bolts. We got Tomas to play Color Splash. I mean, we're on a roll.
We've gotten some people to play some not great games with us.
I'm just here to campaign the Yakuza chapter select, so whenever you guys get to that, please, I'll join every episode.
You and Ricky.
Yeah, both of us will just both be on each episode.
So yeah, this has been Chapter Select. This is, as a reminder, this is episode 2 in our 3rd season. If you would like to listen to previous seasons, you can obviously go back in our podcast feed here or YouTube channel, wherever you're listening or watching. We've got previous seasons. First season is all about Paper Mario. Second season is all about God of War. 3rd season here, we will be continuing next time with episode 3. That will be all about Banjo-Tooie. And then episode 4, we will wrap things up with Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge for the Game Boy Advance, baby.
Jesus Christ.
A good video game.
That is an episode, spoiler alert, that no guest will be joining us on. So that'll be just me, Max, and myself. But anyway, if you would like to keep up with the show, you can find us on all kinds of podcast services. You can also find us on, is it the Max Frequency YouTube channel, Max?
Mm-hmm. That's where it is on YouTube.
You can find the videos there that Max uploads and spends a lot of time editing. If you would like to subscribe or leave us a review in any of the places where you may consume the show, that would be wonderful and definitely helps us out a lot. You can also hit us up on Twitter if you want. I am at Moreman12. Max is at Max, what are you at? I always forget now.
Max Roberts 143.
That's right. Max Roberts 143, and Michael is at Michael J. Ruiz.
The Michael J. Ruiz.
Okay. Yeah. So you can find us
on all socials.
And the show
socials
is on Twitter at Chapter Select.
That's true. I forget because I don't know if I have the login for that.
You don't.
So
I will follow you this Twitter.
So we do have a chat. Yeah, we do have a dedicated Chapter Select Twitter account as well. Be sure to follow us there if you would like to keep up with our uploads for this season. as we move forward. But yeah, until episode 3, when we're back talking about Banjo-Tooie, we hope that you have a good rest of your day or evening or whenever you're listening to this, and we will see you back here next time. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Peace.
Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. This episode was research produced and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 3 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself. Season 3 is all about Banjo-Kazooie. For more on the season, go to chapterselect.com/season 3. Follow the show at Chapter Select and check out previous seasons at chapterselect.com.